If you have a strong family history for type 2 diabetes or a genetic predisposition, is it kind of clear that you're going to get it? No, not at all. Even if you've had gestational diabetes, which dramatically increases your risk of type 2 diabetes, and have a family history of type 2 diabetes, and have a high genetic predisposition, you still are in control potentially of whether or not you develop type 2 diabetes. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and this is a great example of epigenetics and genetics. And we've talked about this before. We've had Dr. Lucia Aronica from Stanford to talk about this, that basically genetics sort of set the path, the potential path, but epigenetics alters how that path is expressed, meaning we have control over how a lot of our genes are expressed. So there's a study I want to talk about that really shows this in pretty dramatic fashion, and then tie it back to what it means for you if you're at high risk of a certain condition and what you can do to potentially lower the manifestation of that, especially type 2 diabetes, which is so prevalent. So the study is called Modifiable Risk Factors and Long-Term Risk of Type 2 Diabetes Among Individuals with a History of Gestational Diabetes Mellitus, Prospective Cohort Study, and it was published in the British Medical Journal, or BMJ. And with this study, it was basically, one of these prospective studies which is a little bit lower quality evidence, but it was a huge cohort that they followed over 28 years. And they found they took the subset of those who had gestational diabetes, so developed basically diabetes while pregnant, but didn't have diabetes before. And they followed those individuals out. And of the 4,275 people who had gestational diabetes, women, of course, 924 eventually developed type 2 diabetes. And what they wanted to do was say, okay, what if they had certain modifiable risk factors that were normal, then what was their risk? And so these modifiable risk factors were body mass index, diet quality, which alternate healthy eating index, which is, whole grains and fruits and vegetables and sort of standard recommendations, physical activity, alcohol consumption, and smoking. And okay, usually I'm not a big proponent of prospective studies as showing anything, but what's remarkable here is the degree of hazard ratio or risk ratio. It is a dramatic change. So not one of these like 1.1, 1.2 that we see so often, but much bigger. So let's get into the specifics. So first, when it came to body mass index, they used less than 23 as a reference. So if they had a body mass index between 23 and 25, the hazard ratio was 2.7 for developing type 2 diabetes. Okay, that's significant, above 2. And between 25 and 29 was 5.7, and greater than 30 was 16. Now, when we talk about difficult, drawing correlation and causation and so forth between these studies, and you don't know if it's just healthy or unhealthy user bias, a relative risk ratio of 16 is very noteworthy, and that really draws the connection much stronger. That's something to take note of. So body mass index over 30, very strong correlation. Now, interestingly, when they looked at the diet, this healthy eating index, and initially it looked like it also was correlated. The higher the healthy eating index, the lower the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. But once they adjusted for body mass index, it was no longer significant. And that's pretty important, because when we talk about diet, is it the diet itself or is it just the weight loss? And if you're following the standard sort of whole grains, fruits and vegetables, higher carb diet, according to this study, it appears to be just because of the weight loss. Now, contrast that with studies looking at low carb ketogenic diets for treating prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And there it appears the effect certainly has some weight loss effect, because those diets are very good at promoting weight loss. But the degree of improvement appears to be out of proportion to the weight loss, and some studies showing improvement even without weight loss. So it does appear that that's likely a better diet for glycemia control and type 2 diabetes, but not that it's the only diet, right? If you're eating a diet that helps you lose weight in a healthy way and maintain a lower body mass index, according to this trial, you are reducing your risk of type 2 diabetes. So interesting to see how you can look at diets differently, right? With carb reduction likely having the greatest benefit, but if you are not hungry and you have a sustainable diet and you're maintaining a healthy weight, okay, that's beneficial as well. So interesting combination there. Also interesting, smoking had no independent association, and alcohol had a U shape. So the people sort of in the middle ground had the lowest risk. Now here's where it really gets interesting for me. When you look at the people who had, one optimal of those modifiable risk factors versus 2, 3, 4, and 5, here's the different hazard ratios for developing type 2 diabetes, okay? If you had just had 1, okay, there was really no benefit. If you had 2, the hazard ratio already goes down to 0.6. If you had 3, the hazard ratio goes down to 0.3. If you had 4, it goes down to 0.1. And if you have 5, it goes down to 0.08. So 0.08, whereas 4 was 0.1. So that's really significant. I mean, 0.08 is almost a complete elimination of the risk of type 2 diabetes, with 0.15 being incredibly powerful as well. I mean, these degrees of risk ratios and hazard ratios are almost never seen in prospective studies. So this is really impressive. And they stayed significant when adjusted for body mass index too. Now, not quite to that degree, but still significant when adjusted for body mass index. Now, the next part that I find really interesting is these associations persisted despite a strong family history and despite a genetic predisposition. So if you had a family history, but you had either 3, 4, or 5 optimal modifiable risk factors, your risk ratios were still 0.37, 0.16, and 0.13. So still really dramatic, even with a family history. And those who had genetic susceptibilities were 0.42 or 0.11 for 3 or 4 modifiable risk factors. And then at first I was like, well, what about 5 modifiable risk factors? Why don't they list a hazard ratio for that? And then as I kept reading, it was because if you had 5 healthy modifiable risk factors and a high genetic susceptibility, 0 people got type 2 diabetes. So they didn't even report a risk ratio because 0 people got it. All right, so this is one specific study, right? And I use this as an example because of these impressive risk ratios. Because one, it teaches us about how to interpret observational data, prospective studies, that this degree of hazard ratio, risk ratio, I use them interchangeably, is very dramatic and very noteworthy. But the other part is even those people who had a strong family history or had a strong genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes and had gestational diabetes, you can't get a higher risk group. They still dramatically lowered their risk by having 5 healthy modifiable risk factors, or even 4 or even 3 healthy modifiable risk factors. And when it came to at least the way they measured diet, the most important impact of diet was maintaining a healthy body weight. So what's the take home for you? Well, the take home for you is just because you have a family history of a certain condition, especially type 2 diabetes, or just because you've done a genetic test that says, oh, you've got genes showing you're susceptible to type 2 diabetes, that doesn't mean your die is cast. That doesn't mean you definitely are going to get type 2 diabetes. It's in my family. What can I do about it, right? I hear that so often as a physician. Like, oh, I have it because my family had it. No, this means this gives you empowerment. This shows that it is in your control, that you can modify those risk factors and those genes in that family history. But it means you have to be vigilant about your lifestyle, maintaining a healthy body mass index, not smoking, not drinking excessive alcohol, getting physical activity, and following a healthy diet. Now, what do those each mean for you? That's a tricky point, right? What is a healthy diet for you? What is adequate physical activity, right? The 150 minutes every week of moderate physical activity, it's a good starting point, but more is better. Moving your body more is better. Staying physically active throughout the day plus doing some purposeful exercise, not one or the other, is the best combination. And when it comes to nutrition, finding a dietary pattern that you can stick with that is going to help you maintain a healthy body weight without hunger, without cravings. Low carb or keto diet is likely the best for glycemic control. Higher satiety eating is also a good way if you didn't want to be on a ketogenic diet, because that can help you maintain healthy body weight without the hunger. So finding the right diet that works for you, and this study shows that you are in control of your genetics. Very empowering. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, please click the thumbs up and subscribe, and we'll see you here next time on Diet Doctor News on YouTube.